Hello everyone, my name is Krishna Balasubramaniam and thanks for attending my talk. Before I begin, I'd like to thank my lab, the Animal Cognition Research Group at the University of Alberta, and NSERC for funding. Imagine you're a person at this food court in the famous West Edmonton Mall trying to decide where to get lunch from. Your decision could be influenced by other people. For example, you might be tempted to check this pizza place out because it seems to be popular with many people. Or you could see this sign saying spaghetti and try this place because you like Italian food. Basically, your decisions could be affected by both social factors, which involves other people, as well as asocial factors, which involves your likes or experiences. Similarly, if you're a black-throated blue warbler, the female of which is pictured here, you could still have social and asocial sources of information affecting your decisions. For example, while deciding where to build a nest, you could take into account both where other breeders previously settled, that is social information, as well as asocial cues such as preferred vegetation structure. To understand how animals might integrate different sources of information while making decisions, we can study cases where the different sources coincide or agree and cases where they are in conflict with each other. When social and asocial sources coincide, the corresponding information could often be used synergistically. For example, ants that had social information as pheromone trail to a food source A and also own memory to a food source A walked faster to A than cases where only one source of information was available. Studying cases where social and asocial sources are in conflict can tell us which source is weighed more heavily and relied upon in different circumstances. For example, nine-spine sticklebacks that saw foraging conspecifics at location A and had own experience of foraging at location B went to A that by using social information only when their experience at B was less reliable. In the current study, we look at the influence of social and asocial sources of information in the nest building context. Nest building is a key reproductive event in the lives of many organisms, which involves making multiple decisions, including where to build a nest and what to build a nest with. A study by Gillett et al. On nest building with zebra finches points to the use of social information about nesting material. Pictured here is a male zebra finch, which is the primary nest builder in this species. While building its first nest, named nest builders that have not built a nest before copy the material choice of other experienced builders. For example, if the naive birds watched experienced builders build with orange, subsequently the naive birds prefer to use orange material to build their nest. From a different experiment by Bailey et al., we also know that birds use asocial cues to select nesting material. When given a colored background to build their nest against, zebra finches prefer to build their nest with colored material that matches the background, an asocial cue. Here we were interested in understanding how birds make decisions about nesting material when social information and asocial cue coincided, that is, agreed with each other, and when social information and asocial cue were in conflict with each other, that is, they were different. To answer the question of how birds prioritize using social information or asocial cues while choosing nesting material, we carried out an experiment in three phases. We first gave male and female zebrafinch pairs an initial preference test amongst three material options, which were three differently colored paper strip bunches of pale yellow, green, and pink, tied to one end of the cage. Based on the male's interaction time with material, we knew which material the male liked the most. For example, green. In the next phase, birds in the coinciding group watched a conspecific demonstrator built with one of the colors which the observers did not initially like, for example pink, against a background which matched the demonstrated material, hence which was also pink. The demonstrator building with pink material was the social information. Finally, the observers entered the final preference test where they were given 20 pieces each of all the three colored materials that were now accessible and a colored background which acted as the asocial cue. The background color coincided with the social information, which was the demonstrated material, and both of which are pink in this example. For the measure of final preference, we looked at the order in which the observer deposited the first 20 pieces of material. We predicted that in the coinciding group, birds would prefer to use the pink material, which in this case was the socially demonstrated material that also matched the background cue, over the initially preferred material, it's green, or an opt-out, which in this case is yellow. After a similar initial preference test, observers in the conflicting group watched a demonstrator build a nest with one of the colors the observers did not initially like, for example yellow, against a different background which was also one of the observers' non-preferred colors, here pink. The demonstrator building with yellow was the social information. Finally, observers were given a chance to build with all the three colored materials and a colored background as an asocial cue. The background color for this group conflicted with the social information of demonstrated material color. For example, background color here is pink, while the socially demonstrated material was yellow. Again, we looked at the order in which the first 20 deposits were made. Here the observers could build with pink material, which matched the asocial cue, or yellow, which matched the social information, or green, the initially preferred material. In this manner, we could test which source, if any, the birds used to decide on nesting material. Here is the first set of results for the 14 observers in the coinciding group. The y-axis of the stacked bar graph shows the mean preference values, while the x-axis shows the test phase, initial or final. The initial preference values were measured as the proportion of time spent interacting with material, while the final preference values were calculated as the proportion of deposits of each color made within the first 20 deposits. The legend shows the material types, and moving from the initial to the final phase, we see that preference for the initially preferred material decreased significantly with a p-value less than 0.01. Contrary to our prediction, there was no significant change in preference for the socially demonstrated material that also matched the asocial cue. And finally, there was no significant change in preference for the opt-out material. Coming to a similar graph for observers in the conflicting group, where the y-axis shows mean preference and x-axis shows the test phase, initial or final. The legend shows the material types. Going from initial to final phase, we see a significant decrease in preference for the initially preferred material, with p-value being less than 0.01. There is also a significant increase in preference for the socially demonstrated material, with p-value being less than 0.05. While there is no significant change in preference for the asocial material, which matches the background. In conclusion, we see that after birds got social or asocial information about nesting material, material preferences changed, with birds losing preference for the initially preferred material. Surprisingly, when social and asocial sources coincided, we do not see a preference to use the corresponding information. We're not sure why this might be happening. However, in the group where social and asocial sources were in conflict, we see that social information had more of an effect while the asocial cue did not. One feature which we did notice and could have possibly influenced our results was that there was a group-wise initial preference for pale green in majority of our birds. Such strong initial preferences could be hard to override by social or asocial factors. Thanks for listening to my presentation. I'd be happy to answer questions.